those five hindrances are weakened by your practice of virtue, also by the second factor of the Eightfold Path, which is usually translated as Sammasankappa. But I prefer, instead of calling it right thought, I think many of you listen to my teachings, I don't think that's a very good translation at all, because I often feel that most thought is wrong thought. Wisdom is something much deeper than thought. And also, some people call it right intention, but I prefer calling it right motivation, where you are coming from, especially the motivation of... Are you okay there? Okay. Especially the motivation of nekama, renunciation, the motivation of avyapada, non-ill will, which I take as a synonym for kindness, and ahingsaka or vihingsaka, which is gentleness. And those three terms I feel are extremely important. Why are you meditating? Where is it coming from? Not what your goal is, but where you're coming from. And when it is from things like renunciation, it makes those teachings which I've said a few times here from Ajahn Chah, we meditate not to get things, but to see how much we can renounce and give away. And we don't meditate trying to be cruel to our body and torturing it. We do it with kindness and with gentleness. And those terms are really important for me. And they also help lessen the hindrances. And even our practice of virtue, speech, action, livelihood, that weakens the virtues. But especially the samavayama, which, if you compare that stage of the Eightfold Path to how it's described in the gradual training, then you find is a pretty good argument to understand that as a right restraint to stopping things, restraining from things which inflame the mind, which anger it, which give it passions, and the unwholesome worldly passions. And if you do that, then you have practiced quite a lot of restraint. And then when you start a lot of restraint of the hindrances. So when you start meditation, those five hindrances are weakened. They're not abandoned yet. When those hindrances are fully abandoned, you will feel it, you will know it. There's two times when the hindrances are fully abandoned, and that is just before entering a jhana, and also when you emerge from those jhanas. But of those two, just before entering a jhana is unstable. In other words, the hindrances can come up again very easily. But also, if those hindrances have been fully overcome, then the question is, why not enter that jhana? The doors are wide open. You just enter in there. And then when you emerge, then those five hindrances are gone for a long time. And you know they're gone. It's very powerful states of mind. And those powerful states of mind, otherwise I describe them as powerful mindfulness. I hope I can see that in each one of you as this retreat goes on. I know I'm seeing that if I see you just shunning the company of other monks or nuns, preferring to have this solitude. You can see one another, smile at each other, but you don't get into so many conversations. And instead, you can go outside and just look at a blade of grass and see just so much in it. your awareness is increasing. And what you see in whatever you happen to be looking at or hearing or even feeling in your body gets very, very delightful. That is the nature of strong mindfulness. I mentioned a couple of times about the most beautiful piece of bamboo in the world, but it's not just pieces of bamboo. Sometimes you sit, when I was doing some walking meditation in Thailand during the monsoon season, when it rains in the monsoons, it really comes down so hard for so long, you can't go outside. And so we used to do our walking meditation in the main hall. And the main hall was just a concrete slab, had a roof over it and some walls. And that concrete was laid by the villagers. So whenever they needed to moisten it, was moistened by their spit. And so number one, it wasn't that even. And number two, the colours were all very different shades of grey. And because they had laid it, that when I was doing walking meditation and getting into some peaceful states of mind, and the mindfulness became very strong. This was just my first year as a monk. I had to stop walking, because in walking meditation, I usually teach as I practice putting my attention about a body length in front of me. Not looking to the left, not looking to the right, up or down, a body length in front of me, keeping my gaze there, so to make sure I don't step on anything like a snake or a centipede. And when I get to the end of the path, I don't keep on walking and hit my head on a wall. So instead, body length in front of me. I had to stop, because what I saw in the concrete, this was ordinary concrete laid by villagers, was one of the most beautiful works of art I've ever seen in my life. And I used to go to museums of art. I remember just going to Mexico and enjoying the museum of modern art in Mexico, and it was renowned at that time for having some amazing artists. But not only that, but seeing classical works of art. And now I was seeing an area of concrete which had texture to it. It wasn't level. It was like hills and valleys. And the different shades of that concrete were like they were painted, by some Leonardo da Vinci. It was amazing how those different shades of grey were actually interacting with each other, perfectly balanced. And again, I was just looking at this piece of concrete in awe. It was satisfying me, it was beautiful, it was delightful. More than delightful, you're kind of blissing out just watching a piece of concrete. And the thought did come to my mind to get someone in town with a concrete saw and cut that piece out and send it to the Tate Gallery in London. To me it looked very, very beautiful. Those were just examples of what happens when your mindfulness gets strong. Whatever you look at appears extremely beautiful. It gives you the happiness of life. And when you watch your breathing, when the 5 hindrances start to disappear and get extremely weak, you can see your breath very easily. The full awareness of the breath. I haven't discussed that yet. I'm not sure what talk you heard of mine in the Anapanasati. But once you start to know a long breath, a short breath, whatever, then you know the whole body of the breath. What does that mean? It doesn't mean your physical body. That's too coarse. It means you see the breath. This is to your left. As it moves along, you see every part of that breath till it goes to your right. And it pauses. You see the space when the in-breath has paused, the out-breath is yet to begin. And then you see it going back again. the whole of the cycle of the breath. And I know that people like challenges, so I'm now going to challenge you. Can you the next day find out for yourself which is longer? The space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath, or the space between the end of the out-breath and the beginning of the in-breath. Which appears longer? That's a challenge for you, to make this breath meditation interesting. And then, when you can experience that hold of the breath, it says to calm down that breath. What does it mean, calming down? Is that something you have to do? These are not stages you decide, now I've finished that stage, now I'm going to do this stage. It happens naturally. If you are not moving, of course you don't need so much breath. No more than a car needs so much petrol when it's parked. Number two is because your mind is not thinking. That thinking mind takes up a lot of energy. Because that mind is just watching a breath going in and going out from beginning to end. Your mind does not need so much breath. It's automatic that your breath starts to calm down. If you're not doing anything, that's just what happens. Your car doesn't decide, oh, I'm not needed now, so I can just become calm and peaceful. It's just cause and effect, it's nature. And once that breath starts to calm down and become peaceful, what happens next in meditation? Your mindfulness has to be quite strong at this point to see from the very beginning to the very end, to see the gap between the breath, breath after breath after breath after breath. And when it gets that calm, the energy which you would usually waste thinking, contemplating, doing, striving, planning what you're going to do next, it's like that energy is freed and it goes into your mind rather than into your brain. They're two different things. When it goes into your mind, the mind gets energized. The mindfulness increases in its power. And just like if you're watching some clump of bamboo, or you're watching just, what's the other thing, just a piece of concrete, it appears beautiful to you. That was something which I never expected when I started doing this. Okay, I think some of you are expecting this analogy, and I love saying this because this is gross, it's coarse, but it's true. Later on, when I was teaching a meditation retreat in Jhana Grove, which I built, when I teach, I also practice. So I was getting into some very lovely meditations when I was teaching other people. That was after I was teaching other people. And then when I was meditating and finished the meditation, just like every other human being, I had to go to the toilet. When I went to the toilet, it was to do what in the West we call a number two. A number one is urination, number two is defecation. And after doing some defecation in the toilet bowl, I made a mistake of looking in the bowl. And this is no exaggeration. I can't make up these stories. They're really weird. The piece of feces I saw floating in the toilet bowl was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. There were different shades of brown, and the way they merged together was like some artist had put this all together. And also just the shape of it was like it was done by a Michelangelo. And I was admiring it. And as I was admiring it, then I could also get the aroma of that piece of feces. it wasn't like some fake smell, like of jasmine or lavender. This was much more earthy, more real, and it was rich. And I was sitting there, I'm not sitting, I was standing watching it at this point. Wow, wow, wow. I'd never seen such a beautiful piece of feces ever in my life. And I did think for a moment that I should take this out and show it to my friends. This was special. I'm being honest, I'm not making this up. But then because I was a monk, I had trained in letting go of even beautiful things. I could press the button, and the most beautiful piece of feces I've ever seen in my whole life, a work of art, disappeared from my life forever. Now, you may think I'm just telling this just to gross you out, or just to make the talk interesting, but there was a lot of Dharma in that. How on earth could it be that a piece of something which most people feel is the most disgusting thing in the earth, how could that look so beautiful? The beauty did not lie in the piece of shit. The beauty lied in my mind. I could look at that piece of feces and it appeared delightful, beautiful, fragrant. This is not madness. This is what the mind does when you get really mindful and peaceful. So you can imagine how easy it is with such strong mindfulness to see this very calm breath coming in and the pause and see it going out again. And it looks like the most delightful breath you've ever breathed in your whole life. It's not just delightful, it's really delightful. And as I mentioned in the group interview to the monks a little time earlier, the type of delight which you experience is such that on these meditation retreats, if you get into such a stage of breath meditation before the lunch meal, so many people on these retreats don't ever go for the lunch. They just keep sitting there in the hall. And you ask them afterwards, why did you miss lunch? They said they had a choice. Continue on watching this delightful breath or go and eat. And they say it's no contest. They prefer carrying on meditating. That's how delightful this mind can be. And even though they know they're not going to get an afternoon or evening meal, they have to wait till the following morning before they can eat. But this is what they do willingly. That's why this meditation becomes so delightful. Once that type of joy comes up, the piti sukha which comes up with your breathing, you cannot not watch the breath. The breath is far too attractive. You don't actually watch it, it's like the breath grabs your attention and you can't sort of leave it alone. It's delightful. And it's not just the same delight all the time. One thing you notice with such awareness, mindfulness, is never in your whole life have you ever breathed in a similar in-breath and a similar out-breath. In all the many breaths you've breathed in, every breath is different. Every one of them. It seems impossible, but that's the truth. If you pay attention, you can verify that. But then after a while, that delight gets very strong. And I've already mentioned that the Buddha said that's a chitta sankhara. It's made by the mind. The mind is purified. To an extent, the 5 hindrances are really weak, and this is how things appear to you. so that when you're watching this breathing, it's like you're watching this breath not through the body sense, but through the mind sense. You're knowing the breath rather than physical feeling the breath. It's an important point to know. Sometimes people think the breath has disappeared. It hasn't disappeared, it's just transformed. You're knowing the breath. That's why it becomes very delightful. And once it becomes that delightful, once that joy increases its power, it's like that mind sense, the sixth sense, the mano-vijnana, that becomes so dominant. Now you start to experience that breath as a very joyful. And so often people experience that joyful breath as a light in the mind, the nimittas. Sometimes I just use whatever visual aids I have, and this is just my hands. Usually your five senses usually dominate your life. Your perceptions are mostly something to do with the five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, taste, touch. The mind, you think the mind is there, but it's just so overwhelmed by the five sense world. You do have kaya vijnana, you do have sota vijnana, and the other vijnana is associated with the other five senses, but the real mano vijnana is quite suppressed. But when you meditate, you're restraining your five senses. You're not going around looking at anything. You're not watching the TV. You're not sort of doing anything which excites with sound. You don't listen to music. The food, you have to eat food. And my goodness, I'm glad you only give delicious food to senior monks, because we know how to handle it. If you had the lunch which I had today, wow, that would blow your mind. It's so delicious. But when you can suppress those five senses, then the sixth sense of mind starts to come up and receive the energy, which means that you can have these nimittas appear and the five senses become suppressed, which is why when you start to experience nimittas, usually beautiful lights in the mind, you can still experience some of the five senses. But it is like they're a long way away from you. You can hear, but it's like someone is trying to talk to you sort of, in the next province of Sri Lanka. They're such a long distance away. Sometimes you can feel some sensations in the body, but it's like those two are distant to you. Your five senses are becoming less important, and that sixth sense becomes more important. Now, I said you often see this as a light, as a visual image, simply because most of us are more visual in our senses. We recognize each other by how we look, not how we sound. When you go overseas, you have a passport, it's got your photograph in the front. I really have a difficulty taking those photographs for my passport. I don't know what it's like in Sri Lanka, but in Australia they say, when you're having your photograph taken, don't smile. I can't stop it. Anyway, smiling. So a few times they've had to take the photograph again. So no, you were smiling. Sorry. And I try my very best looking miserable, but it's hard. But anyhow, that visual sense is the dominant of the five senses, which is why when you experience a nimitta, which is a mental object, you interpret it as something visual. That's why most people experience this as lights in the mind, or as images. Now, first of all, when I start talking about these nimittas, I know that sometimes people complain and they say, This is not how the Buddha taught meditation. So I'm just saying this to confute such people. How to deal with nimittas is the most important part, the major part, 60-70% of the Upakalesa Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. And it's even better to read the Pali translation, because the English translation, I have complained to the translator of the Upakalesa Sutta, they miss out, actually saying nimitta, nimitta, nimitta. It's in the sutta. That's why when people say, what did the Buddha teach? Sometimes, unless you can understand that Pali, sometimes it's just too easy to follow a translation and misinterpret it. So it's there. Upakalesa Sutta. How to deal with nimittas. How to stabilize them. Two of the things which it says about nimittas there, two of the upakalesas are fear and excitement. And when I've been teaching, those are the two main ones which stop people developing those nimittas. When this comes up, it's always accompanied by great feelings of joy and happiness. Pleasure, if you like, but mental pleasure, not physical pleasure. And if you want to know the difference between those two, it's like an ice cream with a different flavor. It's like something which is pure and something which is fabricated. The pure peace and joy and energy, that is to do with the mental pleasure associated in these nimittas. And this is, I'm not sure whether this, I always thought I could talk about personal experience of nimittas but not of jhanas, until Ajahn Brahmavamso came along and said, well, you're treading on thin ice here. Maybe saying you have nimittas could be a pacittiya. Pacittiya number 8. You can check it out, monks. You're not allowed to tell lay people or any lay people in the audience, or even samaneras, about any stage of deep meditation. It's a parajika if you're overestimating, not if you're overestimating, sorry, if you're making it up out of pride. But even correctly talking about these things should not be done. But anyway, I'll give myself the benefit of the doubt here, that with the nimittas, sometimes when these nimittas started to come up, sometimes they were so bright, it's like looking at an image of the sun in midday in a place like Australia with very clear skies. You're not supposed to watch the image of the sun, you'll go blind. And sometimes that's the fear which I had. You see this beautiful light in the mind, incredibly sort of beautiful but very powerful. I can't keep looking at this. When I come out of my meditation, I won't be able to see anymore. Of course, I say that because other people have had a similar experience. And the answer is, this is not a visual image. It's not affecting the back of your eye, the retina. Your eyes are closed. There's no light coming in. This is the way we interpret it, the way we perceive it. And it is very powerful. And it can be as powerful as it wants to be. You never go blind, you just get blissed out. And even the bliss of it. When I said this, some of the monks laughed, but it's true. And other people have also repeated this, not knowing that I said it. That sometimes the pleasure of these nimittas is intense. So intense that you think that no human being can endure so much pleasure. I'm not talking about being a monk. Monks, are you allowed to have pleasure? a lot of times people think, no, you're a monk, you should be restrained, you should be ascetic, you shouldn't even smile. They used to smile in the time of the Buddha, monks. And the Buddha said that's a good sign, those monks are actually meditating and getting good insights. That's where their smile comes from. That's in the, the Monuments to the Dhamma Sutta in the Majjhima. And anyway, sometimes the delight can be extremely strong. But don't worry. I was young when this started to happen, so I was ready to try anything and to try and see how much pleasure a human being can take. That's a fun part of meditation. Totally allowable, permissible, and leading to deeper meditations. As a teacher these days running a monastery, sometimes we have people come to our monastery for all different reasons. On this one occasion, we had this gentleman who wanted to come and stay for a couple of weeks because he was a heroin addict. And he wanted to see if he could come to a monastery to basically cold turkey, that means not taking anything, and being in a very positive environment so that he could take the difficult physical experiences of not taking heroin and get through it. And it was wonderful having him there. He was really committed, really tried his very best. And he told me what it's like being addicted to something like heroin. He says every day, 1,000 times he has to say no. And if he says no 999 times, but says yes once, then he's got to start all over again. That's how powerful that addiction is. And unfortunately, after a couple of weeks, he did say yes. And he arranged for someone to bring him a hit of heroin, so he lost that chance. But before that happened, I was teaching him meditation because he was desperate, to do something to overcome this terrible, terrible, terrible addiction. I remember him coming running to me once. I was just about to get in the car to go to our city centre to give the weekend talks. And he said, please stop for a moment. I've had this meditation. I think it was nimittas. And he said, in that meditation, it was more bliss than heroin. He said, I could never really imagine something could be better than the thing he was addicted to. He was a lay person, he had a wonderful wife trying to support him. I know, Ajahn Brahm, you've said many times that the bliss of the meditation, even the nimittas, can be more joyful than sexual orgasm. This was when I was a lay person with girlfriends. I've been a very good monk for the last 49 years. But, that's when I became a monk, by the way. But nevertheless, he said, I never thought I could say that about the pleasure of heroin. But it was true. It blew my mind that nimitta experience was more intense. And that's what you're going towards. Enormous pleasure and happiness. So how does that happen with nimittas? How that happens is, again, the mind starts to recede away from the five senses. And when it recedes away from the five senses, you can start with all sorts of nimittas in the mind, depending on how weak those five senses have become. Sometimes, for example, you can see screens of light and dull light. That's a start, but it's not the full power of the nimitta yet. If ever you see anything like that, like a screen nimitta, don't be concerned what color it is. The color is not important. What is important is the intensity of it. So if you see a weak screen nimitta, then look for that part which is the most beautiful, the most attractive, the brightest. You zoom in on that. When you zoom in on it, then that becomes bigger, the brightness stays, and then you zoom into the most beautiful part of the most beautiful part. You keep zooming in until the nimitta becomes incredibly bright and very simple. Usually the most simple shape is like a sphere or a circle, like the full moon at night. Sometimes you have nimittas which, I remember one of these nimittas which I often speak about, is of a beautiful scenery, like valleys with trees and waterfalls and rivers, something idyllic. And then I realized that's what we call a complicated nimitta. There's too many things in it. So the way I dealt with that was that I looked for something which again was the most attractive. And I was looking, scanning those images and saw a tree. And on that tree, of one of the thousands of leaves on that tree, there was a sparkle on the edge of one of the leaves, like a dewdrop sparkling in the sunlight. And I zoomed in on that, focused in on that. And that sparkle became this gorgeous nimitta. Like everything else fell off the screen, and all you can see is the sparkle, which became again like a star in the sky. Beautiful, simple. That became a wonderful nimitta. And sometimes, depending on what you've been doing before, sometimes those nimittas can be a little bit scary. The fear may come up because these are powerful objects, and many of you, if you sit, especially if you're a monk who's only ever rode a bicycle before you became a monk, and then someone puts you in the front seat of a Lamborghini sports car, which can go at 200 miles an hour in 5 seconds, you're afraid of that power. That's the best simile I can give you, okay? You've got power in your mind, and that very much is scary. Not only that, it's hard to control. That's why I'm giving you many of these little tricks. So one time, I remember having this nimitta, and it was a monster. You're getting very peaceful in your mind, and you see this monster right in front of you. Would you be scared? Please don't be. These things can never, ever harm you. All they can ever do is make you afraid. So when I had a monster in front of me, this was many, many years ago, before they had the punk fashion in Europe. This monster had spiky hair. These days, many years ago, that would be fashionable. Had spiky hair, and his eyes were bulging out of the sockets. Its tongue was, again, out of its mouth, going, "Ooh," trying to make me afraid. You could see the teeth. They were not ordinary flat teeth, they were all spiky. In other words, like some vampire. And you could see like blood dripping off them. And in his neck there was a garland of, skulls. Not like Angulimala, just had fingers. This was shrunken skulls. And going, ugh. No, I never got afraid. I had enough understanding of nimittas at this time to know that I can play with this. So what I did, just like being a schoolboy, I doodled on this monster. I imagined a straw hat on top of the spiky hair, the little flower coming out. I put, at that time, Ray-Ban glasses over its bulging eyes, so it looked like a Elvis Presley supporter. And in its teeth, I blacked out a few of the teeth and put a cigarette in the corner of its mouth. and I put a scarf around the skulls. And I just made this monster, just by thinking about this. This is a nimitta, it's a mind creation. Just by thinking about this, you can do this. And I made this monster look so ridiculous that I smiled, and that was the last time this monster ever came to visit me. I humiliated it. That was really good fun. I've taught that to other people who had similar visions, and they had lots of fun humiliating the many monsters which come up in the mind. In other words, you do have some control over this, but once the nimitta comes up and it's really strong, it does have lots of piti sukha with it. It is delightful. That's one of the reasons why I encourage it. It gives you energy, huge energy. But then the other thing about the nimittas is, in order to take them into the jhanas, or to proceed into the jhanas, you have to learn how to stabilize these nimittas. And so many times people say they have nimittas like something is spinning around or moving all over the place. And that was one of my big problems for about 6 months, I remember. How to stabilize that nimitta. It's bright enough, beautiful, how to keep it just there. And then one day I solved that problem, because even the things you do in your life, ordinary things, can give you great insights into what's going on and how to solve the problem. And I made a solution when one morning I was shaving my beard. And I'm not quite sure how you practice the Vinaya in the Aranyas, the forest monasteries of Sri Lanka. But even in the forest monasteries in Thailand, if you had one, you can use a mirror. And I'm glad I had a little mirror to use when I was shaving. Not so I didn't cut myself with the razor, but because I saw the image in the mirror was moving. It reminded me of the nimitta moving. So how can I stop that nimitta moving? And just to prove a point, I held the mirror perfectly still. I held it in my hands, and the image in the mirror was also moving. And I realized that the meditation nimitta moves because the mindfulness that watches it is moving. So instead of putting my attention at the nimitta and trying to keep the nimitta still, it was like the thing which was watching. I kept that still. And then, I hope you understand that, it was really a crucial insight for me. And then the nimitta became still. It wasn't moving at all. And then the energy built up enormously. And what happens when the energy builds up? It attracts you into it. And that becomes a jhana experience. But this is a preparation to get into those jhanas. And also, I remember Ajahn Chah teaching about those jhanas, or those nimittas rather. And he used, again, a simile from his experience as a forest monk on Charika in Thailand in those days. If you're a forest monk, you can't just go to a monastery and have a shower or fill up your water bottle. You have to use whatever's there in nature. It's one of the reasons, one of the requisites of a forest monk is a water strainer. And so in the afternoon or late afternoon, you try and find a river or a lake. It was important. And if you found one, you'd put your mosquito net umbrella about 10 to 20 meters away from the edge of the lake. And then you would wash any robes which were dirty in the water, hang them up to dry. You'd have a bathe if you needed to, and then you would take your strainer and refill your water container which you needed. And once you'd finished that, you'd go inside your mosquito net umbrella and meditate until you were too tired and had to go to sleep. And that was common practice. But then Ajahn Chah told the simile of the still forest pool. Now there was a book written about that, but this simile was not included in it. But this is what I heard myself from Ajahn Chah. He said that sometimes when he was sitting in the evening and the sun had not gone down yet, but it was getting low light but not total blackness, or if the moon was up and you could see something, he would keep his eyes open. And with his eyes open, sometimes you would see the animals come out from the forest to drink, wash and play by the forest pool. But he knew from experience they would only come out from the bushes if they never thought there was anyone looking. You all know the most dangerous animal in the forest and the jungles is the human being. If more tigers are being killed by humans than humans are being killed by tigers or elephants, we are the most dangerous. And so you can imagine a tiger coming out, having a look around. Animals' eyesight is not that good. They usually listen and smell. And if Ajahn Chah moved, they would hear it. And they would run it back into the forest and not come out, no matter how thirsty they were. But he said sometimes he could sit there so still that when the animals looked, listened and smelled, they could never sense he was there. And then they would come out with their young. The whole family would come out. And then they would drink and play in the forest pool. These were the days before people could see these animals in the wild on National Geographic or Nature Channel or whatever. And so this was so enjoyable, so much interest and fun before he started his meditation, to see animals in the wild just mess around and play in the water, not knowing he was watching all the time. And then after the ordinary jungle animals would come out, the ones he knew existed, then he said sometimes if he sat still enough, then some very strange, weird and beautiful jungle animals would come out. Remember how he said it. It's like these are the animals his parents and his teacher had never told him about. They were so rare. And these beautiful animals would only come out of the jungle and bathe and drink and play in the forest pool, only when he was exceptionally still. Any excitement, yes, they would sense that and run away. Any fear, they could almost smell, and they wouldn't come out. When he had lots of stillness, no fear, no excitement, then they would come out, beautiful animals, and play by the still forest pool of his mind. That's what he said were nimittas. Rare animals, gorgeous, beautiful, but they'll only come out, you'll only experience them when your stillness is very, very great. It's worth it. And once those very rare animals will come out and play, then last of all will come out the jhanas. To play by the still forest pool of your mind. Gorgeous creatures, that was a metaphor. And again, I really enjoyed hearing that metaphor from an Ajahn Chah to show that this was possible and this is how it's done. You have to learn how to be so still and you don't react when nimittas start to come. If you react and say, yes, at last, I've been meditating for 30 years, now I see a nimitta, they're well gone by then. They're very shy. If they know you're talking about them, they will disappear. You have to be that still. And excitement or fear. I was very surprised that so many people do have fear. These are the things which monks, nuns, deep meditators, even the Buddha talked about. They're not dangerous. You have the opportunity, they're there. Please don't have doubts that you can't handle this. You can handle this. It's not just that they're safe. They are really important for you to become enlightened. This is what we're about. So when they come up, don't waste the opportunity. Just be still. Enjoy. And then after you emerge from these states, then you can have any excitement or fear, whatever you like, you're safe. Also, I say, it's important you do take notes when I'm speaking, but if you have any of these deep meditations, you don't have to take any notes at all. Your mind is very strong, very powerful at this time. And what you experience, you can never forget. It's strange, but we don't have a good word for this in English. I'm not sure if they have one in Pali. But the closest word they have in English is trauma. If you've been in a trauma, you can't get it out of your head. You keep reliving it. But that's because it's negative and life-threatening. These are the same sort of intensity, probably more intense. But again, they have the common feature that you can never forget these. Your mindfulness is incredibly strong. And so that what you experience is registered in your mind so easily. And that is one of the reasons why once you emerge from these nimittas or jhanas, it's easy to recollect. That is when you start doing you might call it these days debriefing yourself. What was that? Why was that? This is where you do the explorations. I don't say contemplation. Contemplation is too much thinking. Exploration. What was that? Why was that? Why did that happen? What's its result? And because you've had the experience, then those will be easy questions to answer. But whenever you have any deep experience in meditation, please don't just say, what was that? Please ask the question of yourself, what was missing? What disappeared? What wasn't there? And that's where you get the most powerful of insights. It's what wasn't there teaches you about the nature of anatta. Something was missing. All those attributes which you associate with the self. What wasn't there? Was it joyful? My goodness, it was. Why? Why did so much of suffering disappear? Not 100%, but a lot of it. Why? This is at the end where you have the opportunity to have great insights. You've had a deep experience. Sometimes I say the most powerful of your life, but that is an underestimation. The most powerful of many of your lives. and it's like you struck a vein of gold in the ground when you're mining. There's so many insights there you can just pluck out as you wish. And this is actually where you understand that now these are the places where the paths and fruits can be just plucked. You've got a deep vein of Dhamma which you've experienced. Now, when I talk like this, is a danger. I recognize this danger, but it's more of a danger of not talking about these things. The main danger, as soon as I talk about the incredible benefits of these states, it will create desire in you. Even many of you might think, well, I don't understand Sinhalese, so I'm just going to go back and meditate. Even you might say, well, I'm not going to translate this, I'm just going to go and meditate myself. Why not? That's more important. But that desire, that wanting, is a hindrance. You can't overcome hindrances by following hindrances. So don't have wanting for results. Want the causes. In other words, what causes these deep meditations? Knowing the 5 hindrances, weakening them through your practice of virtue, through your understanding of right view, from restraining your 5 senses, empowering the mind. And once that mind is empowered enough, it's going to happen. You can't stop them. Any of you think, this is just Ajahn Brahm, he's making this up. Look, I'm honest with you, I don't make these things up. I know that some people say, you're just teaching from the Visuddhimagga, which is a commentary, it's not what the Buddhist taught. I will tell you here, I have never read the Visuddhimagga. Parts of it I remember, but I haven't opened it up. I did read some of the practices on virtue because I was studying the Vinaya as a young monk. But the practices of meditation, when I should have read that, I decided deliberately not to, because people said I was just copying the Visuddhimagga. I'm not. I don't know what's in it. I know roughly what's in it, but not specifically. So this is like the practice, mostly what I understood with a great teacher like an Ajahn Chah, what I understood by personal experience as well. That's why I would love to share it with you. And if any of you feel that you want to offer me a gift out of gratitude, the greatest gift which you can offer me is not another tube of toothpaste, is not another bag of tea. I got so much tea. Just come and say, Ajahn Brahm, thank you. I've just experienced the jhana, and mean it. And I've been a monk long enough to know people are making it up, and those which are real. That's the greatest gift you can give me right now. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.